Hello everybody, Matthew here, and welcome to what may be an ongoing series on technology. Today we're going to talk about the Nintendo Switch. Is there a Switch 2 coming? A Switch Pro? Well, let's discuss. The Switch was released in March 2017 and had a minor upgrade in 2019. At the end of February 2021, it's about 4 years old. First, let's talk about terminology. What is a Switch 2 versus a Switch Pro? Well, I believe a Switch 2 would be a console that developers are free to target only it, whereas a Switch Pro is one where the developers are forced to target both it and the base Switch. So, why might there be a market for a Nintendo Switch Pro? Well, the Tegra X1, which powers the Nintendo Switch, was actually pretty old when the Nintendo Switch was released. The successor chip, the Tegra X2, was released the year before the Switch was released. So, does that mean that market price exists? Yes, probably. Does it mean Nintendo looked at it and decided they didn't care? Yes, probably. The issue is that all video game consoles have software that challenge it. Take a look at Nintendo's own Breath of the Wild. There are certain areas that challenge the Tegra X1, but that doesn't necessarily mean that just a slightly faster processor makes any sense. One of the reasons for the popularity of the Switch is its ability to play games ported from other consoles, such as the PS3. Those previous generation titles could be ported to the Switch rather easily. Would a slightly upgraded Switch be able to play like PS4 games? Well, no. So a minor upgrade to the Switch would not dramatically increase the possible games catalog for the Switch. Is it realistic to expect the new Switch to be able to play PlayStation 4 games? That's kind of the premise of a Switch 2, that it would be able to play the next generation of games. Well, if you look at iPhones released in 2017, and you compare them against the current generation, you see at least a 4x improvement in processing. Will that get to PS4 level? Well, Sony claimed that the PlayStation 4 was a leap of 10x from the PS3. But always, those kind of numbers are quite made up. So, I mean, a 4x, probably getting into ballpark that developers wouldn't have very much of an issue moving from a PlayStation 4 game to a new Switch. There are two other things that Nintendo will have to address with the new Switch. First is memory. The PS4 had 8 gigabytes and the corresponding Xbox had 10 gigabytes. Of course, some of that's shared with the operating system on those systems, but it means that the 4 gigabytes in the current Switch will have to be doubled to at least 8 gigabytes. The other concern is internal memory. Games have increasingly accelerated the disk space that they require. So PlayStation 4 games take up an exponential amount more disk space than PS3 games. So the onboard storage on the Switch will have to be greatly increased. So when are we likely to see a Switch 2? Well, a 7-year lifespan for the Switch would put the release date March 2024. I think that's a bit too long. Nintendo released the Switch when a lot of people didn't have 4K TVs. Well, now they do. Also, a series of ports have come to the Switch that show that developers are aiming their base level hardware higher than the Switch is capable of doing. That means there's more pressure on Nintendo to release earlier. However, 2021 sounds not in the cards to me. Probably early 2022 is the earliest that we would see a Switch 2. One reason for that would be the requirement to have a killer app for the new system. The Nintendo Direct this February pretty much rolled out Zelda coming out this year. It likely will be the first cross-platform game releasing both on the Switch and the Switch 2. I think it's a fairly good bet that the Switch 2 and the Switch will share a common architecture. This goes a way to show why developers were asked to get 4K assets ready for their games. If the Switch 2 is suddenly playing your game with low-res assets, it maybe wouldn't look very good up on a big, giant 4K display. So, to sum up, the reason why there was never a Switch Pro is that, well, there was never a big market for such a device to begin with. Any console has games that tax it and show performance issues. So a Switch Pro probably never made a lot of sense to Nintendo. A Switch 2, on the other hand, that can play PS4 caliber games, well, that probably required significant upgrades to memory and storage, such that just calling it a Switch Pro or a minor upgrade to a Switch didn't make a lot of sense. Certain games developed to run on a PS4 caliber chipset could have issues running on a base Switch. Thus, it makes sense for Nintendo to allow developers to target only it. But if you can only target it, it's no longer just a Switch Pro with a new Switch. I do think Nintendo has been experimenting with more powerful Switches all through the Switch lifespan. This may explain the number of rumors from various publications that a Switch Pro is imminent. They may have gotten intel about orders from Nintendo for certain chipsets and jumped to that conclusion. In the end, the Switch turned out to be a highly capable system that got ports of games that many people thought were impossible, like Doom. So in the end, that probably explains some of the reticence to releasing a Switch Pro. There really was no need for it in the end. And for a final prediction, I believe the next Zelda will be the first major cross-generational game. This will allow Nintendo not to disappoint Switch owners who have been waiting for the next Zelda, as well as give the Switch 2 familiar and popular IP for its initial release. Well, thanks for watching these predictions. We'll find out in the next couple of years whether I'm a great oracle or simply full of it. Well, probably more later than the former, but thanks for watching.